So the theme of the Masters is growth, and there has never been an even larger research endeavor aimed at identifying how our industry can organize for growth than Marketing 2020. Its findings dictate how our industry, led by CMOs, can and should move forward. Here to share some key insights ahead of this afternoon's CMO Roundtable is the founder of Effective Brands. Please welcome Marc Dessoin-Aron.
Good morning. And let me give you a little backstage insight. So there's a huge operation room back there, and more people than you could believe. And then there's Bob. And Bob has a control room in the corner there, and he runs a very tight ship. But I'm going to turn the tables on him for just 1 minute. Because Marketing 2020, which I'm here to introduce, and just take you through some of the key findings, is really something that Bob, in a big meeting in Brussels about a year ago, kicked off. In Brussels, and this is a part of the ANA that you probably don't see very often, is the World Federation of Advertisers. And the ANA, obviously, being America, is the biggest member, but there are lots of other members. And Bob stood up and said, we need to do something around how the organization is evolving. Fast forward a year, I'd like to take you through some of the key findings and insights before we go to lunch and perhaps somewhere else. But I'm representing a very esteemed group of partners that really collaborated on this. Effective Brands does this for a living, but we collaborated not just with the ANA, but Spencer Stuart, who in the CMO space I think are probably one of the leading recruiters, but also Forbes with their CMO Circle, and Metrics Lab and Adobe. That's the US team, but over the last year this has snowballed into a 10-market initiative where literally from Turkey to China to Brazil and everywhere in between, people, marketers like yourself, contributed to Marketing 2020. And I'll tell you who and what they were talking about. The first is we talked to over 250 CEOs, peers of the CMO, and CMOs themselves, as well as agency heads like Bob Greenberg from RGA, but also the head of digital for Obama's campaign, who I think many of us would credit with having made just that little difference in the elections. What does it take, and how do you organize for 2020? We also went quant, and over 10,000, that's why Bob said that this is the biggest study ever, over 10,000 marketeers worldwide from 92 countries contributed to some of the findings that I'm going to be taking you through. And there's a quick summary on your chair. But I wanted to just touch upon some of the key highlights now, and then at the CMO Roundtable, we're going to go into a little bit more detail. The first is that within the US, over 1,000 marketers took place. And as you'll see, the demographics of the marketer were very well spread, very senior, and from literally every cohort, we have good representation. And why did we do all this, and what were we looking at? I think if you've seen anything over the last 2 days, it is that everything around us is changing. I hate it when people say marketing is changing, because actually I think fundamentally it isn't. But the world around us and what we do is certainly changing. I don't think anybody would argue with that. What we do is changing beyond recognition. But here's the interesting thing, perhaps slightly scary thing. How we are organized as marketing organizations looks eerily the same as about 50 years ago. And that's why we stepped back and said for Marketing 2020, what actually in this new world is the role of marketing? To our peers, to the outside world, how do we partner? And in fact, once we know that role, indeed, between global and local, interesting, I thought for the first time there were a significant number of presentations by CMOs talking about the dynamic, think about Snickers, and even Dunkin' Donuts this morning, about global and local, and then between local and agencies. And actually, the partners like Facebook and Twitter, sometimes the direct relationship, sometimes through the agency, sometimes through the media agency. And then, in fact, what do we allow our consumers to do with our brands? Or is it even for us to judge? And once you know your role, what then within that is how we build capability. How do we equip ourselves and our teams for success? Now, overarching above that is something that I think every marketing leader must be experiencing, we know it is, which is how do I lead my marketing team into this space? As a CMO that grew up in a different time, that everybody's looking for leadership to, how do I make sure we transition without pretending to have the expertise to motivate the right people and actually bring my team into this new era? All in service of business growth. So, now I'm going to take you through just a little bit of the findings. What are the characteristics of the brands that we see winning in 2020? Then after lunch, or if you're a slow eater, we're going to have a CMO roundtable with some very esteemed CMOs that I'll introduce in a minute, and we'll look at how do you actually organize for growth. So I think as marketers coming here to this incredible event, you have a big choice. You need to ask yourself, after lunch, am I going to be part of a discussion and a debate about the future of marketing? Or am I going to make myself look foolish on the golf course? Or perhaps playing tennis? I will make the case that you need to come to the other room and join us for the roundtable. Let me go quickly through what we're hearing in terms of the opportunities and challenges that are motivating and challenging the CMOs that we spoke to worldwide. The first, in terms of challenge that really excites people, is obviously social media. I don't think there's a single marketeer that doesn't feel that suddenly we're able to do what we always felt as marketers we wanted to do. Collaborate with consumers, be out there, have new touch points. This is exciting stuff. It's all about the external world when you ask people, what's motivating you now? Thirdly came up though, and the term has been used a lot already, purpose. A lot of the marketeers played back to us that they felt that they were giving back meaning, not just to the brand, but to the company. And then this globalization, mentioned quite a lot already. This is something different. If you think just 2 or 3 years back here at the ANA, we weren't talking about globalization. Now what we hear marketers say is, did you know that the size of the middle class that buy my products is going to double within a decade? That's exciting stuff. But overarching, we hear marketers say, I feel my influence is increasing. People, my colleagues, my peers, my boss are looking to me and asking, what should we do as a company? And I think there's a transition here. Maybe 10 years ago, and I'm being black and white and undoubtedly a little too oversimplistic, but many of us, in the eyes of the CEO and the CFO, were in the doghouse. We were seen as the people that had our own little language with googliness KPIs. We didn't exactly know which part of the spend worked and didn't. And in short, they didn't feel that we were a peer in terms of responsibility for business results. Over the last decade, what's clearly happened, and I'll show you the stats for that, is that we're now seen as an equal. But it goes further, because the door is wide open. All other disciplines are saying, help us figure out what to do next. And they're looking at marketing. And marketers feel that pull, and guess what? It's exciting when people want you to make a difference. But there are some challenges in the way, and the scary part is that 90% of these are internal. The first point is infobesity. The term big data has been used a lot, but oh boy, when it comes through the door and the window and the ceiling and down the chimney, it's suddenly a lot. What do I do with all this data? And I guess less funny, but much more to the point, and it's been mentioned a lot. As CMOs, as marketing leaders, we sit on that cusp between the inside world and the outside world, and we see the need for integrated solutions, and then we look inside the firm and we see silos. We see parts of the business that don't even want to collaborate. How are we going to bring people and to get them to work together? And how do we get consistency across all these touch points? The number 2 worry of marketeers. And then privacy. Because we've already had a few examples of that throughout this conference. If you get this wrong, oh boy, does the stuff hit the fan. And then this sense that we're just having to do more with less. You know, CEOs saying, earned media is free, isn't it? So maybe a few fewer FTEs, when in fact the number of touch points has exploded. So I'm supposed to do more with less. But overarching that is this sense that I see what's necessary because I see our competitors, I see what Amazon's doing, they're paving the way, but I don't have enough influence inside the firm to make it happen. And on a very personal level, this ability to stay current, because it's moving fast. How do I stay current? So it raises the question of what does it take to win? Well, this whole study was predicated on moving to one side the winners and the other side the losers. We asked people, and many of you contributed, thank you for that, how did you do relative to your competitors over the last 3 years? The winners and the losers. From this point on, I'm a little bit more polite. I call them the overperformers and the underperformers. But you might question whether actually that is a sensible way to look, because why would somebody be honest? Well, one, we know from research like this that people in online questionnaires actually are very honest about how well their business is doing. But we didn't take their word for it. We took 49 companies and outside looked at their brand health and their revenue growth with a team from NYU. So when I say they're overperformers, you can take my word for it. Now, how am I going to try and pull this together? Because it's very difficult in a short period of time, and there's a lot of stuff to cover, which will come in follow-up CMO roundtables and such. But I'd like to offer a framework that we are calling the Marketing2020 Effectiveness Framework. The first is around the what drives successful brands. And I'll tell you about it in a minute, but it's about big insights, it's about purposeful positioning, and it's about total experiences. But that's not enough. What we see the winning organizations talk about and do, most importantly, is actually connecting the company and marketing within the company to everyone else, inspiring the total organization around what it is we're delivering to our clients, but then creating total focus around 2 or 3 things that need to be achieved and having great clarity around who does what. With all these touch points, it's so necessary. And finally, we see that there's in an iterative learning mode. We call it build. You try something, you learn it, it's good or it's bad, and then we move on and we build capability as we progress. Those will bring alive after lunch. For now, I want to focus on the insight, the what. Firstly, big insights. Well, you know, someone at one of our roundtables said, yeah, big data, big insights, it's a little bit like sex at high school. Everybody talks about it, nobody does it. Or, if they do it very badly. I can connect with that. But the interesting thing is, we asked everyone, what are the 3 trends that are going to shape your marketing strategy? And only one thing separated the winners from the losers. And it doesn't surprise me, because we all go to the same conferences, we read the same magazines, but one point was different. Big insights came up 30% higher among the overperformers versus the underperformers. And it's things like we have the data available to measure our marketing effectiveness. Look at that, the orange bar are overperformance, the blue are the underperformers. And we're able to leverage the data and the analytics that we've got to improve our marketing effectiveness. Again, a significant difference between winners and losers. But that's enough about big data. I want to talk a little bit more about purpose, because it's been mentioned so often, but I want to place some clarification here. And good, there's my slides again. We asked people in the survey, 10,000 marketeers worldwide, is purpose going to drive a difference? And maybe not surprisingly, 73% of marketers agree it's going to drive competitive advantage and business growth. Now that number is too high. It made us think and say, well, what do you actually mean by purpose? And I'm very happy to have seen, walking around the corridors here, Jim Stengel, who I think made a great contribution to this discussion by moving away from Procter & Gamble and actually offering all of us his insights and experience around purpose with his book, Grow. But basically, purpose is the umbrella that drives everything the brand does. It's about functional benefits like Jim installed on Pampers, where really the dryness serves for the overall purpose of Pampers. It's the functionality, and there's no substitute for delivering that first. But beyond that, you can take it to the emotional benefits, again, driven by a purpose of real beauty, where Dove has run programs not just serving you with products, but with services like school education programs that build on the insight that 85% of women have low self-esteem about their looks. That's emotional. And for some companies, not everybody, it can be societal benefits. This is a picture from a Rio favela, where the world's #1 paint company started by giving away paint to poor neighborhoods. And everybody here, I think, has read Malcolm Gladwell with The Tipping Point. Well, guess what? When you paint the walls around you, you feel different. When you paint the neighborhood, crime goes down. AkzoNobel discovered this with their program around purposeful positioning for their brand, and now they've done it in over 10,000 places in the world. This is where CSR meets brand purpose. But I think it would be wrong to think that your CSR activities, by definition, mean you have a purpose. It needs to be on the brand. And purpose clearly drives business growth. What we see across a whole spectrum of metrics is that the brands where people say we have a clear purpose overachieve. That's the second part of the mix, the winning mix of Marketing 2020 brands. But where it stops and it all comes together is the total experience that the brand is able to offer. We think that as we look forward, brand value, what we offer and how it's perceived to be valuable by our clients and our customers will be something around the depth of the relationship. How personalized do the services feel? Is it just a product? Is it a product with tailor-made information? Is it actually a product with information and services that are right for you? Every one of these steps increases the value in the mind of the customer. The other dimension is the breadth. We've heard so much about the increasing touch points that every brand now has available to them to reach out, and that consumers have to interact with the brand. Are we in every one of those in a relevant way? Now, these are big opportunities, and they already came up in the front part of the presentation, but they have big risks. Because if you get the personalization wrong, you're in breach of privacy. Not a good place to be. If you get the touch points wrong, you're inconsistent. And I don't think anybody here didn't go through the Marketing 101 school that says one cue from the brand that feels inconsistent and everything drops. Now, just to bring this alive, Amazon does this very, very well in terms of personalization. Every time I shop there, they seem to know more about me, but they use it in a way that makes me shop more. They aren't in my life in many touch points. It's on my laptop and perhaps on my phone, but that's it. Now let's look at the other spectrum. Disney is very good in breadth. There are so many touch points that you can see Disney in, and Disney is very consistent. You have to give them credit. But if you walk, as one of my colleagues recently did, off a cruise ship by Disney, and you just spend $10,000 on spending a week somewhere in the Caribbean, and you walk into Times Square and you go into their store, they don't know who you are. In other words, they're not leveraging that data across touch points to personalize the services to you. Where we think things are going, and of course I wouldn't be a consultant if it wasn't in the top right, is where Nike has gone with the Nike Fuel Band. Because Nike took a step back and said, our purpose is to unleash the athlete in everyone's body. So they looked at the touch points that they had when they sold you shoes, and by the way, their share started to drop for the first time, and then they said, let's explode it out. What are all the other touch points where we can add value for our consumers? And I think they got it right. I think they did a very good job. Let's have a look at a film that just describes their mix.
This is the Nike Plus Fuel Band, made to inspire anyone to be more active. Its foundation is a universal system of measurement called fuel. Unlike calories, fuel lets you compare yourself with anyone, no matter what their body type is or what they're doing. The Fuel Band is the device you wear that tracks everything you do. One button lets you check your stats. LED lights change from red to yellow and then to green when you hit your goal. Motivation is the core of the experience. To make sure fuel is something people want to use and share every day, competition and celebration are built in. As we experimented with the algorithm behind Fuel and the design of the experience, our work gave us an insight we felt summed up the Fuel Band story. Everything you do counts.
Can you count, suckers?
At launch, this became the campaign that introduced Fuel to the world. From the moment they put it on in the morning, users are constantly interacting with the Fuel Band and the service that drives it. They are sharing more, talking about the brand more, and spending more on Nike products. Fuel has fundamentally changed Nike's business as well. From a marketer of athletic shoes to a company whose products and services work together in a system of value for consumers, and whose mission has become an obsession with using technology to make every athlete better. This is the Nike Plus Fuel Band.
Now, there was one sentence in that video that I just want to go back to. It's changed the way that Nike is organized. I had the honor of actually getting a tour of the campus about a year ago, and the CMO, Trevor Edwards, he described Nike as a service firm. And it took me aback why he said that. I thought they made shoes and apparel. They think of themselves as a service firm. This is the stuff that I think all of us as marketers, as we think about our value propositions moving forward, need to step back and think. Last week, we gave 65 colleagues a Fuel Band. Yes, of course, I'd like them to be healthier. But why really is because I think every marketer needs to be asking themselves, what's my Fuel Band? How are we leveraging the insights about the consumers? Because there's a lot of data involved. It's incredibly technical. They have a whole third part of their business now that's around data. How do we leverage that in a purposeful way, in a way that's true to bring Nike's purpose alive? And then what is the total experience? Because yes, it's about making me run. Yes, it's about making me feel proud. As I was coming backstage, the lady that put on my mic compared my fuel points with hers. She was higher. And yes, it feels like a total experience. That when the next time I buy shoes, I think Nike. I think that's our challenge. So that was just a little bit about the what do the winning Marketing2020 brands stand for. And as I said, after lunch, we're going to go to the other room, and there's a very esteemed panel of CMOs that are going to be talking about, but how do you organize for that? I won't be alone. Brian Turkelson will be here from Starco MediaVest. Joan Chow, CMO of Conagra, is going to share a real insightful Conagra story around making it happen. Jim Spiros is going to talk about how Fidelity has leveraged big data and purpose and managed to make a financial company so much more successful. And then Antonio Lucio is going to talk about the fact that he actually had to take on the role of HR for a little while within Visa, and that he leads by example in going digital. Because if we don't, as marketing leaders, how can we expect our teams to do that? All of that will be moderated by undoubtedly the most influential CMO recruiter in the US. He placed, I think, more than half of the people that have passed this stage, Greg Welsh. So we'll talk about why are CMOs suddenly longer in their job. It's a firm trend, but it has peaked over the last 3 years. And why does Google measure googliness? And why does the founder of China's most successful internet company talk about chief experience? And how will the marketing organization look? Is it something like this? Or do we have new roles like thinkers, feelers, and doers? We're really going to get into the nitty and gritty of the organization. And I invite you. It's going to be an open discussion. We'd like you to join us for that. But of course, maybe that's not why you came to Phoenix. Maybe you just want to play tennis. Or play golf. I think you'll do the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks for providing a great snapshot of what's to come, and I know there's a lot more that we're going to do at the CMO Roundtable and through a lot of A&A organizational constructs that we have at our various conferences. Yes. So one of the things that I took away in your nice summary is that it feels better than it ever has before. Marketing seems to have a level of respect than it ever has, and we're starting to see some of the characteristics align. And it kind of came through a lot of the presentations that we've seen over these past 2 days. Why is that taking place?
I think it's just the reality of the outside world. It's no longer, marketers saying, hey guys, this needs to happen, because always they were seen as, basically having a vested interest in having to listen more to marketing. Everyone in our board is experiencing this in their own lives. I ask rooms, how much do you buy at Amazon? How much more do you buy at Amazon than a year ago? And everybody sticks their hand up. Every other discipline is saying, HR is coming to marketing saying, I need a social strategy for my recruitment.
Right.
But they're all coming to marketing, because marketing was here first. And so you've got this pool, and it's a very good situation to be in.
For so many years, we've often been at these conferences and said, marketing is viewed as an expense and not an investment. Are we sensing some of that starting to change?
Well, very, very clearly. Two things. One, we were never able to give an ROI on our spend.
Right.
And that's still true for some of the offline media, but that's certainly not true for the online media. I mean, I have no vested interest here, but after 10 minutes whether a program is working or not. If you leave it up, you're basically burning money. If you're iterating and putting the next thing up, you can show the CFO. And I think it's been a big contributor to CFOs and CEOs now saying, okay, you're an equal peer. I understand, and we'll talk about that later, I understand that you're one of us. And that just wasn't the case before.
CEOs have long struggled with ensuring that the messages that came out of the marketing community truly influence the dynamics of their financial results, which translate obviously into increasing shareholder equity. Is the CEO community starting to get this as well?
Absolutely. One of the things, and we'll talk about this after lunch in the CMO roles, I was with Keith Weed, the CMO of Unilever, 2 days ago, and he was explaining how over the weekend, he, the CFO, and the CEO had been communicating all weekend long because they had their financial results posting. And he said, before, I wasn't responsible for corporate communications. Now he is. What we see more and more, and it's true for Mark Pritchard at Procter & Gamble and many other firms, are that the company is stepping back and the CEO is saying, we need to have one face, and I'm looking to you to coordinate that. So they all come up the same way to the CEO now. So yes, that relationship is becoming far more collaborative.
So 4 years ago, nobody ever heard of the words brand purpose, social responsibility. It was just kind of an offshoot. Cause marketing, we'd kind of just do as something because we think we should do it. What's taken place?
I think this is really one of the fundamental shifts. If it's about CSR, it's about table stakes for doing business.
Yeah.
And if that's all that drives you, fine, but don't call it purpose.
Right.
What marketers are now discovering is that consumers that have near perfect information, literally, as they're driving down the aisle or if they're passing gas stations, they know about each of these suppliers, what they stand for. I'll mention later that Oxfam now has, and this is one of the biggest NGOs in Europe, literally puts the 10 biggest CPG companies next to each other, not just on sustainability,
right,
but on women's rights, on education, on minimum pay, and on child labor, and things that people care about. And more, if the functional benefits are the same, and we found that in many categories the functional benefits are the same, it's going to be the emotional, but also the societal benefits, where people will say, if everything else is the same, I'm going to go for you because you stand for what I care about.
One of the things that we've seen at the ANA is this increased focus on marketing organization. It is actually now ranked the third highest in requests by our members as to what they want to know more about. Are the CMOs and the marketing community in general starting to realize that there is this kind of causal effect of changing the way we organize ourselves to improve overall results?
Well, it's such a great point. I don't know a single marketeer that woke up in the morning and said, today I'm going to design an operating model. It's not what drives marketers naturally.
Right.
But when you look outside and you see that consistency across touch points is so crucial to the total experience, then you have to look inside the firm and say, wait a minute, you're talking to them, you're talking to them. Guys, we need to get together and we need to organize in such a way that we sound like one. I've spoken to CMOs throughout this study that said, I'm ashamed that when you go to my website, it looks and feels like a different company. That's an easy one. It gets more complicated when actually you need to be talking to supply chain people and HR people. But the marketers are seeing that, they are the champion of that, and integration is the new theme for marketing org.
Last question before we follow up at the CMO roundtable. Globalization.
Yes.
12 years ago, we were knee-deep into globalization, and then it kind of went away. What's happened to bring it back in such a powerful approach these days?
Well, you know, I was reading in the newspaper this morning about HTC, the phone company that came out of nowhere and is quickly going to nowhere. In a matter of months, industries are seeing that product innovations are no longer innovations because out of nowhere come products that are at least as good and half the price. And I'm exaggerating, of course. We are now living in a global market. And if you as a company are cutting down trees for palm oil so that you can sell body lotion here, people know. Right. And they will know very quickly. So, in fact, the big players, they're usually the companies that try to do business well. And so many of them have actually grabbed onto this and said, finally, we can show that we're doing this responsibly, whereas some of our price-cutting competitors are getting away with murder and cutting our prices. So I think there's a dual pull. Consumers want to know, and if they don't, it's very easy to just be exposed to it. But the big companies that are trying to do business for 100 years and would like to be in business for another 100 years, they have a vested interest in sharing their best practices. And very often, those big companies actually have very good records. Right. So I think globalization is about information, and of course it's about supply chain and labor forces. We're just in one big market now, and it's number 2 of the marketer motivations too. We like being in a global world.
Well, we've got a lot more learning to come this afternoon. We invite everybody to please join the CMO Roundtable. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Deswanarand. Thank you so much. Great work.
Thank you. Great.